Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. It's good to see some returning faces, including our speaker, some faculty I haven't seen in a long time. So Marianne Hinsdale among them. So I'm Tom Landy. I'm the director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture here at Holy Cross, and I'm glad to welcome all of you here today. The McFarland Center sponsors and supports lectures, conferences, discussions, and other initiatives that foster dialogue on issues of meaning, morality, and mutual obligation. Today I'm pleased to join the Office of College Chaplains in welcoming Professor Emeritus Jim Nickoloff back to campus. Jim was a popular teacher of systematic theology at Holy Cross from 1989 to 2009 when he retired as a very, very young man.
Not retired.
He also took part in Latin American studies, peace and conflict studies, and women and gender studies programs. He's also taught at Boston College, Weston Jesuit School of Theology, Santa Clara University, the Jesuit Theological College in Melbourne, Australia, and the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. Today he's adjunct professor of theology at Barry University in Miami. Jim studied liberation theology under Gustavo Gutierrez, a founder of the liberation theology movement in Lima, Peru, and in 1996 edited a volume, Gustavo Gutierrez, Essential Writings. He's co-editor of an introductory dictionary of religious studies and theology, which was published in 2007. While at Holy Cross, Jim also edited a volume of essays by 8 alumni called In, Out, and About on the Hill, Lesbian and Gay Alums Reflect on Life at Holy Cross, 1980 to 2003. He published that in 2010, and an expanded edition, which he has here with him, with new alumni reflections, was introduced here last Friday when he facilitated a discussion among several alumni contributors to his book. Jim's on campus for a week, and his husband, Robert, who was my classmate, was here, but has gone back to Washington as a guest of the chaplain's office, and I want to thank Mary Beth Kearns-Barrett and Meg Fox-Kelly for bringing him and taking the lead on all of this. Today, Jim wants to help us think about how science and lived experience are influencing our understanding of the meaning of two categories, gay and Catholic. There we go, an easy task. Please join me in welcoming Jim Nickoloff.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's a privilege to be back on campus, and it's a privilege to have you paying attention to me. I would like to thank not only Tom and the McFarland Center, but also the chaplain's office, especially these two ladies in the front here, Mary Beth and Megan, for making so much of this possible. I also want to thank Mary Roach, Professor Mary Roach, and Professor Ginny Ryan. Either of you here? Yes, there they are. There they are, side by side, for inviting me and my spouse, Robert, to visit their 4 of their classes between last Thursday and this morning. I think that's all I have. In 2009, when I left Holy Cross but did not retire, I spent most of the next year as a fellow at Santa Clara University in the Ignatian Center for, in the Jesuit Center for Ignatian Spirituality and Education. And the topic of my research that year at Santa Clara University, by the way, which that fellowship was largely due to Professor Marianne Hinsdale sitting here, my colleague, friend, and former chair of the Department of Religious Studies here at Holy Cross. The topic of my research that year was called Intrinsically Disordered: Gay People and the Holiness of the Church. Intrinsically disordered, as many of you will know, is the official term used in Catholic teaching to describe homosexual people. Intrinsic disorder. And so I took that sort of as my topic for that year. And that was 10 years ago now, 2009. And I would like to share with you how my thinking has evolved over the last 10 years, reaching the point it is now, but of course, always open-ended, I hope. I'd like to frame my remarks this afternoon within the context of a 500-year chunk of time Actually more than that, but I'll just start with that. I would argue that in the last 500 years, Western people, and Christians, and perhaps Jews in particular, have faced three great challenges to our fundamental worldview. In 1543, as you know, Copernicus's volume on the revolutions of celestial spheres was published, in which he argued that, or attempted to demonstrate, that the Earth is not the center of the solar system or of the universe, which most people at that point in time believed. And in a way, you can see how easy it is to believe. To me, it still looks like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But we are told, and we know, that that is not the case. And what happened with Copernicus was that the Western mind's concept of space was completely exploded. And we now have come to the point where we are told that the universe is much more enormous than we ever suspected and still expanding, all of which is very difficult to wrap at least my mind around. Copernicus's work, his theory, was of course soon condemned by many people, including the official teachers of the Catholic Church. And in the year 1616, approximately 75 years after it was published, his book was placed on the Index of Prohibited Books. For many centuries, the Catholic Church maintained such a list, an index of prohibited books, which were seen as damaging to Christian faith, and potentially so damaging that they could cut people off from eternal salvation. So Catholics were forbidden from reading books on that index. That book remained on the index until 1835, so more than 200 years, when Catholics were not allowed to read about the Copernican theory. Let me jump forward to the 19th century and a second great challenge to the Western worldview and to Catholic thinking in particular. And I'm referring now, of course, to Mr. Charles Darwin, who in 1859 published his famous volume called On the Origin of the Species, or On the Origin of Species, sorry. This book, as we all know, not only tried to account for the data that Darwin had discovered through his travels around the world and so on, and it not only outlined his theory of natural selection and evolution, but it also expanded, in fact, exploded our sense of time. For many people in the 19th century, and even in the 20th century, by the way, for many people believed that the world, the universe, was about 6,000 years old. This estimate was based on calculating from biblical evidence. When Darwin finished his book, he had concluded that in order for natural selection to produce what we see today in the way of diverse forms of life on the planet, that it would have required several 100 million years for that to take place. That was his best estimate. Now today, in 2019, I'm told that the estimate of life on the planet is approximately 3.2 or 3 billion years old, something like that. So even Darwin was way off. And the planet itself, we're told, is about 1 billion years older than that, something like 4.3 billion years. So what we're standing on here, or at least what this building is standing on here, is about 4 billion years old, and all of us sitting in this room are the product of 3-point-something billion years of very slow evolutionary process. It's incredible. And as you can imagine, in the case of Darwin, as in the case of Copernicus, this theory was not greeted happily by officials of the Catholic Church. Now, his book was not officially put on the index of prohibited books, but it was not encouraged. Catholics were not encouraged to read it. So, first, explosion of space. Second, an explosion of time, our concept of time. And I would say that both of those are things that we are actually, even now in 2019, still dealing with. We may know all this in our heads, but it's harder to actually live with, and it's certainly, I think, impossible really to wrap our heads around this. This past summer, I had the pleasure of visiting my brother who lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, and he is a biochemist. And he took me up to his condo up in the Rocky Mountains for a couple of days, and it's in a beautiful place, and in the distance are snow-covered mountains, even in July. And he happened to have on the shelf there, believe it or not, a copy of Darwin's Origin of the Species, which I had never read. So I picked it up and started reading it, and was delighted to find not only is Darwin an incredibly good writer, even for a layman, but also that he is incredibly humble. He was fully aware in 1859, as he put this out, what kind of ramifications this had, and how much trouble this was going to cause down the line. In any case, while I was reading that book, my brother suggested that we go off up in the mountains to take a little hike, and we sat by a beautiful river that was flowing fast along there because of the snow melt, and he was fishing, and I just sat on a rock and sort of looked at the butterflies and the grass and the leaves of the trees, listened to the birds with Darwin in mind, and thinking about how miraculous, mysterious, and how profound all of that I was looking at really is, and also trying to feel somehow my deep connection with all these life forms, because we all came from the same cell 3.4 billion years ago. So we have the first and the second challenge to our way of thinking. Now, just to say something more about the second one, in addition to the theory of evolution, of course, what this expansion of time, what also went along with that was Darwin's conviction that everything is in motion. Everything is in flux. Everything is in a process of change. I think we all know that in terms of living things. If a living thing, like all of us or anything else, does not change all the time and every day, every moment, then by definition, it's dead. It would be something like this. So we are always in flux, in motion. But it's not, I'm told by scientists that it's not only us. This desk here is also moving somehow. I may not perceive it, but everything around us is in motion. Now this seems to me is both good and bad. The good side is that if everything is in flux and everything is subject to change, and if time is infinite, is this huge amount of time that we have, the good news is that if things are not the way we want them to be, we can do something about it. There's a space, there's a time, there's a possibility for altering the things that are. The bad side of this, though, is, at least speaking for myself, I like a certain amount of stability in my life. I don't want things to be different every single day. And the older I get, the more this is true. All right? So living in a world of flux and change and constant motion is exhilarating one minute and can be frustrating and even paralyzing the next moment. All right, let me turn now to a third challenge, which I think has arisen in my lifetime in a very special way, unfortunate way, but in a profound way. 3 years before I was born, or 2.5 years to be exact, before I was born, the first, and thank goodness last, atomic bombs were used in human history to kill hundreds of thousands of people in a few seconds. And as a child raised in the 1950s, and some of you in this audience, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember this, but anyway, in the 1950s, when you were in grade school, we had drop drills regularly. What the teacher would be doing a math problem or something on the board, and then all of a sudden would turn to the class and go, drop. And everybody had to get under their desk and hold your duck and cover, it was also called. All right? Now, as if that would protect you from atomic bomb. I was living in Los Angeles. It would have been one of the main targets. There was no way. But anyway, this is what we grew up with. So from that point, from World War II on, throughout my entire life, I belong to a generation, and all of you, even the youngest people here, belong to generations which have known about the possibility of eliminating life on this planet through human action like that. But in more recent years, more recent decades, a second threat to human life has become only too clear. And I'm referring, of course, to what we call climate change. We all were thinking about that in a big way last Friday. Climate change, of course, is shorthand for a change in the climate which is destructive of life, and which is caused by human action. That's what it's shorthand for. These two threats, the atomic weapon, atomic bombs, and climate change caused by the way we live, the way we live, sometimes we think innocently, not trying to hurt anybody, but just minding our own business. Nevertheless, we're now more and more aware of how this actually is damaging to many of those incredibly beautiful species that Darwin was writing about. And we are now talking about a planetary crisis. So that's the framework in which I have been, for the last 10 years, rethinking the meaning of these two terms, gay and Catholic. It's in the light of Copernicus, Darwin, and now the threat to the planet, to life on the planet, thanks to human activity. So let me begin. I want to reverse the order of the two terms as they are in the title, and I want to deal first with the word Catholic. One of the beauties, and I think one of the most profound aspects of our Catholic tradition, one which I deeply appreciate, is that Catholicism at its best, not at its worst, we've seen what it can be at its worst, but at its best, Catholicism is a both-and tradition, not either-or. And you can see this in some of the great doctrines, such as Christology, the conviction, the affirmation that Jesus Christ is both fully human and fully divine. Very difficult to understand. But in my case, there have been two aspects of Catholic that I have rethought in the last 10 years because of this both-and character at the heart of the Catholic tradition. And one of those is I have come to see the church as both holy and sinful at one and the same time. That's also hard to wrap your mind around. How is it possible for something or someone or some community to be both holy and sinful at one and the same time? I'm not the first person, by the way, to propose this. Karl Rahner, the great German Jesuit, was writing about this even back in the 1930s, long before Vatican II. But nevertheless, it took me a while, but now I've come to think about this in a more serious way. And the second idea that I have sort of reconsidered, thanks to both and thinking, is the conviction that opposites attract. Yes, opposites do attract, but my own life experience, and I think even science, will demonstrate that likes attract as well, which complicates the reality quite a bit when you're saying both this and that. Before I say any more about either one of these two things, I want to say something about the person who taught me more than anyone else how to think in a both and way and live in a both and way, and that would be my father. A couple people in this room have met my father. He passed away in 1999 of a heart attack. But my father was, on the one hand, he was a very, very difficult person. Alcoholic, womanizer. I have a half-brother as a result of that behavior. Very complicating to our family life. My father was a bully in many ways, and it was difficult often to be in his presence. All that on the one side. On the other side, my father was the most generous and most compassionate person I've ever known. He literally not only would, but did give the shirt off his back to someone who needed it. He was constantly dragging home what I would call alley cats to my mother's nicely set out table for dinner because the person had no place to go. When my father died, we had a family little service at my mother's home with the extended family invited. We all sat in a circle, and we went around the circle, and each person sort of shared memories of Dad, and I was the last person to go, and I was listening to what everybody had to say. And of course, at a moment like that, it's considered untoward to say anything not so nice about the person, right? It's just not done. Well, anyway, everybody was going around, my brothers, my cousins, and my aunts, uncles, everybody was saying all these lovely things about my dad, all of which were true. I had no problem. Everything was true. But there was a huge elephant in this room. And I was having this conversation with myself the whole time of what I was going to do when it got to me. When it got to me, fortunately, I don't know, either being crazy or courageous or some combination of the two, I decided I had to tell the truth. So I said yes, yes, yes to what everybody has said here, but on the other hand, let's not forget that Dad was also this. And by the way, people were really relieved when that was acknowledged. So my father is really, both and thinking is really hard. I have a lot of gay and lesbian friends and, colleagues and so on in the Catholic Church and in other religious traditions. And I completely understand why some of them decide to leave altogether and say, this church, this tradition, this has nothing for me. I'm finished, out of here. I also understand people who make the opposite decision and who decide to stay in the church, in their religious tradition, and say, well, yes, there are these bad things about it, but I'll just keep my mouth shut and do what I can sort of quietly. So there are those who stay but remain silent, and there's those who speak up but leave. The number of people who actually stay right on this very difficult point of speaking up and staying is very few. And I think it's because both and thinking and both and living are hard. The church is both holy and sinful. And if you don't believe me, read this book. All right, every one of the stories in here, except for one of the students in this, Rusmir Muzic, who graduated in 2003, arrived at Holy Cross as a Bosnian refugee, Muslim, and gay. Try to put that together. All right, by the way, he was also pierced and punked out, which in 1999 was quite a statement, hair all over. He was fabulous. So he really never had to deal with the Catholic Church's official teaching as something that would impact him personally, But he was in this place where, of course, it was around him. But all other 11 stories in the book are about people who came out of the Catholic tradition and had to somehow or other take that into account as they went through their own process of self-discovery and integration and so on. And some of the people in this book have left the church and found other spiritual homes. One is Megan Sweeney, who is now an Episcopalian priest. Some have just left altogether. Others are still in the church. One of them, Malcolm McCluskey, is now the principal of a Catholic girls' high school outside of Washington, D.C., and still very much part of the Catholic tradition. So negotiating the both and thing is not easy, but a number of people have actually tried to do it. And I think that, like going back to my dad, you know, if I'm talking about him, if I say only the bad stuff about him, that's actually a distortion. And if I say only the good stuff about him, that's also a distortion. The truth is, the reality is, both of those things are true, and they're true of the same person at the same time. Not easy. Let me pass to say something about opposites attracting and sames attracting. I think it's fairly well known that opposites attract. We see this in science, we see this in relationships. When my spouse Robert and I visited Mary Roach's class and Ginny's class, I don't think it took the students 30 seconds to figure out that he and I are like day and night. All right, completely different personalities and so on. At the same time, though, I've discovered that in many ways, likes also attract. You know, we are not drawn to people only because they are completely different from us. We're also attracted to others because of what we have in common. Common hopes, common dreams, common commitments, common fears, common sufferings. Somebody once said, you know, what you absolutely have to have for a marriage to work is you have to basically be in sync on religion and politics. And so far, that is actually my experience. Beyond that, there can be lots of differences, but these fundamental things, these fundamental values have to be held in common. And I would say that this is also true of God. In the Christian tradition, and I think also in the Jewish tradition, great emphasis has been placed on the otherness, the total otherness of God, completely beyond, completely different from us. And yet, we have, at the beginning of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, we have the famous phrase that you and I, are made in the image and likeness of God, which to me somehow means that somehow we are like God, not only unlike God. We are not God, and it would be foolish and even dangerous for us to think that we are God, but we are like God because we are persons. We are like God because we have minds. And most of all, we are like God because we can love. So I think that it's an exaggeration to make us completely unlike. I have experience of people perceiving God only as completely other. And one example of that would be the first time that I walked into the great cathedral in Cusco, Peru, right on the main square there. It's a very formidable building. It's an overwhelming building. And you walk inside. Now today they have electric lights, but of course that's more recent. It was built in the 1550s and 1560s. Massive, dark, the windows are tiny. There's no effort to make light come into this space. And even today, if you go there, you will see indigenous people who have been taught for 500 years to fear God. God is someone scary, big. The word used is almighty, 2 words, almighty. And you'll go in and see people actually cowering in front of statues and altars and so on. This is not the God of liberation. This is not the God who walks with. This is not the God who is friend. This is not the God who is companion. So when we over-exaggerate this notion of God's otherness, total otherness, it seems to me we actually destroy the possibility for real relationship. Once again, it has to be both and. God is other and not other, or like and unlike at the same time. Let me say something about another aspect of the word Catholic that I have been rethinking in the last 10 years, and that has to do with the doctrine of original sin. A drink of water before this one. Original sin, you know, is the idea that at the beginning of time, the first humans wanted to be equal to God. And they were told not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They disobeyed that, ate of the fruit, and as a result of trying to make themselves like God, they were cast out of the garden and condemned to different kinds of punishment for the rest of history. So the traditional understanding, based on those first chapters in Genesis, is about disobedience, and it's about trying to be like God. But my experience of my own life, and now, at the age of 71, my experience of many other people's lives over a long period of time, is that the opposite of this is also true. The sin is not only that we've tried to make ourselves like God, but it's also that we don't try hard enough to be God-like. It's the refusal, actually, to be like God. If we are made in the image and likeness of God, and if God is creator, capital C, then of course, one of the main things we need to do is create, be creative, and so on. But many times we are blocked from doing that because we see ourselves as completely unlike God. And we see it as a sin to try to be like God. This plays out in a particular way with Christians and with the person of Jesus. For centuries, 2,000 years approximately, Christians have claimed that Jesus is both fully human and fully divine, as I said. However, in reality, I think most of the time, most Christians see Jesus as almost exclusively divine and not fully human at all. In fact, when you ask people about trying to be like Jesus in some difficult way, people will often say, well, he's God. I can't do that. I'm only human. That little phrase right there, only human, or it's only too human, really needs to be cast out of our vocabulary. Because if we believe that Jesus is fully human and is the model of what it means to be human, is the best example not only of divine but of the human, then that's what we need to be. When we behave less than that, when we do things which are destructive of ourselves and of others, that's not only too human. That is less than human. That is dehumanizing. Dehumanizing me, who does it, and dehumanizing the people that I do it to. So I try now to avoid that phrase, it's only too human. That just lets us off the hook. If we Christians are going to take the story of this person, Jesus of Nazareth, seriously, then he is the model. And what he does is what we're called to do. Let me pass then to make a couple of remarks about the word gay. One of the things that I have been thinking about these last 10 years in relation to the word gay is has to do with the difference between optimism and hope. Optimism and pessimism both are related to hard data. If we see the data and it says the market is going up, we can be optimistic about the price our house will get on the market. If the data is going down, we can be pessimistic about that. Optimism and pessimism are founded on facts. Hope is very different. Hope believes in a possibility even when the data says otherwise. And the data often is very convincing. But hope does not give up. Last Friday, we had the panel sitting here, and one of the authors, I mentioned him, of the book, Malcolm McCluskey. 10 years ago, when this book was first published, Malcolm's chapter was anonymous because he asked me, I was the editor, he asked me if he could publish it, if it could be published anonymously, because he felt like his job as a Catholic school principal would be in jeopardy if it was known that he was gay. 10 years on, he has changed his mind. But that's not the most significant part of this story. Malcolm told us last Friday afternoon that a really remarkable thing happened at his 20th Holy Cross graduation celebration here on campus. He came, and one of the people who had been most difficult in his life while he was at Holy Cross was his freshman roommate. His freshman roommate was extremely homophobic and made all kinds of comments about gay people, about Malcolm, and made life difficult for him at the beginning of his Holy Cross career. In fact, after they split, Malcolm really didn't want to have anything to do with this guy. And when he left Holy Cross, he never had any contact with him again, of course, until the 20th anniversary. On the 20th anniversary, I don't really know where they were, someplace here on campus, and Malcolm spotted the guy across the way and went, oh no, you know. And the guy started coming straight toward him. And they greeted each other, said hello, and this fellow said to Malcolm, I really want to apologize for what I did and what I said to you 20 years ago. Malcolm said, oh, that's okay, no, forget it, no. Tried to stop him right there in his tracks, and the guy said, no, let me finish. The only reason I came to this reunion was to say this to you. No other purpose. Now, the data would have indicated this was not going to happen. But if we hope that people can undergo change of heart and mind, you know, that's what I think we're called to do. I'll tell you a second story along these lines. Robert and I met here on this campus, actually, in Stein Hall, where the Religious Studies department used to be. I was in the department teaching. Robert was taking a tour of the Holy Cross campus. A mutual friend of ours who worked in the chaplain's office was guiding him around, and they came into Stein Hall, knocked on my door, and the rest is history. So, you know, we've been together now exactly 25 years, last Sunday. And all that time, my parents, both of my parents until my father passed away in 1999, both of my parents, and now since then my mother, has been very friendly to Robert and to us as a couple. However, for many years my mother has had the custom, as some of your parents probably do too, of writing one of those Christmas letters at the end of the year on the computer with little pictures and sending it out to everybody she knows. And the main content of my mother's Christmas letter every year is her visits to her various children and grandchildren and all of that. In July, we went here. In June, September, we went there. Well, all the years that Robert and I lived in Boston, and by the way, after my father passed away, my mother, thank the Lord, met a wonderful man. They became boyfriend, girlfriend for the next 19 years. He just passed away about a year ago, and my mother's still going strong at 95. But in any case, they would come and visit us and stay with us for 4 or 5 days. And during all that time, Robert, who's the cook in the family, would do all the cooking, ferry them around to various museums and this and that. In the letter, the Christmas letter, my mother would always say, "We had a great time in Boston at my son Jim's house." Now, Robert and I owned the house together, and he did more of the work of caring for them while they were there than I did. So after this letter came the first year and I read it, I was so ashamed, really, and I knew it was very hurtful to Robert. So from that year on, I always read the letter quickly and then threw it away before he could see it. In 2007, Robert and I were legally married, thank you, Massachusetts, in Cambridge City Hall. But we decided not to invite any family members, just a handful of friends. The world's tiniest wedding, it was 9 people, I think. But we did send out announcements to everybody about what we had done, including my mother. That was on July 17th, 2007. On July 17th, 2008, this massive Hallmark card, you know what they're like, arrives at the house, and it's from my mother. I wasn't thinking really. I opened it up, and it was an anniversary card. And she wrote in her own handwriting, I sort of get emotional about this. She wrote, I hope the two of you have as many happy years together as your father and I did. She was 85 years old at that time. And she has been on board completely since, until now. So when people tell me there's no hope for this, or there's no hope for that person, or there's no hope that a person's mind or heart could change, I now have data to the contrary. It's not just hope against hope. I actually have data to the contrary. And so that has been one of the things I think that has really expanded for me during the last 10 years. Let me say one more thing about the word gay. Gay, as you know, in the English language, began with a very positive connotation. You know, it means merry, joyful, happy, lighthearted, carefree, and so on. Over time, though, especially in the 19th century, it began to take on a connotation of carefree, but in the sense of sort of sexually carefree and sexually promiscuous. And naturally, that meaning of gay was assigned to the people in society who were looked down upon for their sexuality, primarily homosexual people, but it would have been anybody who was not exclusively heterosexual. So that's when the beginning of the time when the word takes on this sort of negative, he's gay. Today, I like to sort of keep both of those meanings in both of those meanings together, the positive one and the negative one. The negative one is a reminder of how being openly gay in this world today is a challenge to not only the Catholic churches, but I think even the Western world's understanding of what it means to be human. Just by being open, that the binary world of male, female, hetero, and so on, that is challenged just by people who are not exclusively heterosexual in their affectivity and so on, just by their being open about who they are. And so keeping in mind the negative meaning is important. At the same time, keeping in mind the positive connotation of the word gay, happy, festive, and so on, is also important. Because in the struggle for human life, in fact now for all life on the planet, it's important to celebrate life along the way. All justice struggles are hard work. And in order to have the energy to hang in there for the struggle, it seems to me regular celebration, regular fiesta, as they say in Latin America, is a requirement. So being open about who I am now, I think, is a very small but perhaps important contribution to confronting the planetary crisis. I say this because I can't prove it, but I have the conviction that people who on this planet who are able to open themselves up to someone like me, who's outside of the majority, me or any other person who doesn't fit the mold, people who are able to do that, come to be able to do that, like my mother, for example, or like Malcolm's roommate, that they are more likely to be willing to commit themselves to the struggle to save life on the planet than are those people who are closed to people like me and all others. So this is one of the reasons why I encourage everybody, no matter who you are, to be completely open and honest and transparent about yourself. Not only sexuality, but everything. Because this is a way of inviting our fellow human beings on this planet to open their minds and open their hearts. In the end, the heart of the matter really is a matter of the heart. And I want to read just the last words from this book, which come from the final chapter, which is the one that I wrote. It's an interpretation of these 12 people's lives. It's my interpretation, it's not their interpretation. My interpretation of their lives. And this is what I say, and I'm talking about them, but I think I'm also talking in a much wider way about maybe all of us. The heart of the matter is, in fact, a matter of the heart. As people on all sides of the debate about sexual identity know, and not only about sexual identity, but about all these great questions, and especially the planetary crisis at the moment, as everyone knows, but sometimes refrain from saying, LGBTQ people, like others who are, quote, different from the majority in one way or another, are not, at this point in time, asking for mere tolerance. Toleration means putting up with something or someone you in fact view with disdain or you even despise. Tolerance is not an adequate expression of Christian faith. Only love is. The life stories told in this volume represent an invitation to the church, and I would say to the world, made in love, to move beyond falsehoods which separate human beings and to enter into a profound communion rooted in truth. A communion among ourselves and a communion with our Mother Earth. These writers and the many others whom they represent invite the reader to see and celebrate the beauty and goodness of this incredible diversity. In their stories, readers who see and hear with their hearts may glimpse the deepest level of human life and at one and the same time, the mysterious depth of God's love. Christians, for their part, believe that God's last word has already been spoken in history. It is the word of life announced at Easter, rising from the desolation of the cross. But our last word has not yet been heard. It has not even been spoken. Nor have we heard the last word from anyone at Holy Cross, from anyone in the church, or anyone on the planet, on sexuality or anything else. Indeed, there are many chapters still to be written and added to the ones we read here with wonder and gratitude and hope, and we await them all. As you can see, to go back to my starting point in my remarks, in 2009 when I left here, the focus of my attention was the church and the relationship between being gay and the Catholic tradition. In 10 years, actually, my focus has moved sort of beyond the church. I don't think it's enough now to be concerned only about conversion in the church's thinking and church's behavior and so on. That's way too small. The planetary crisis that we face now is of such a degree that we must turn our attention in everything that we do to that. And therefore, I would say I've come over these 10 years to try to figure out how I, as a gay man, can make a contribution to changing the minds and hearts of our fellow human beings on this planet in order to rescue life in this world. Thank you for your attention. So if there are any comments or questions or reactions, I'd be happy to hear those. Yes. As I said, both and thinking is not easy. One part of my answer to your question would be that my relationship with God and my language about God, all of that needs to take place in community. That's what church at its best should be. It's a community of accountability. My language about God is not enough. What I'm putting out here to you today, or any place else, in class or in an article that I might write and publish, this is the best that I personally can come up with for right now. But it needs to be reacted to by people like you. It needs to be taken in by the rest of the community. Theology, I'm a theologian. Theology in our tradition is always it's a hypothesis. It's an idea that's put out there for the consideration of the whole church, the whole people of God, who then say yes or no, or yes to this and no to that, and so on. And in the course of time, in the course of the conversation, it's refined. So if I start to stray too far this way or too far that way, or you start to stray too far this way or that, the beauty of being in community, a community of scholars, a community of faith, a community where this life is practiced, is that we can hold each other, accountable. Now, that doesn't mean that the community can't go off track too, of course, but it's less probable in that situation. So the main thing I would say is to keep in mind that my thinking about any of this, about God, about life, about myself, is just it's the best I can do for now. This will primarily happen, I believe, through people sharing their lived experience with the wider church. Again, going back to Jack's question, in this community of faith, which now I want to expand this even to the whole of humanity, right? All of us need to be sharing our life experience with everybody, not just within the church. In 2000, my spouse Robert and I moved to Dorchester, and we went to the local Catholic parish, which was called St. Margaret's on Columbia Road. 2 blocks walk. And we went, every Sunday for a couple of months. Now, the people in that church, are not stupid, and they could put 2 and 2 together. These 2 middle-aged men coming to church every week. Once might have been one thing, but coming together, it's pretty obvious who we are. No question. So at some point, we felt comfortable and so on, and we finally decided to invite the pastor, the assistant pastor, the nun who was in charge of religious education, a couple of other people on the staff over for dinner. Robert's a great cook. So we had them over for dinner, and while we were there, as I recall, I don't think we talked about sexuality, homosexuality, anything at all. It was just a human interaction in an evening. We were letting them see us, know us, and we were getting to know them. That's what's going to change. That term will fall out of use and eventually be superseded by some other descriptor through, I think, this kind of interpersonal, interaction and real knowledge. And as I said, actually, it's not just about tolerating others. It's more than that. If you're going to talk about yourself as a Christian, then it has to be more than that. Really learning to love those who are different. All language in theology, not only in theology, but all language in theology is theoretical. But all language in science, I'm not a scientist, but I have a brother who's a scientist, and I know there are scientists. I've known a lot of scientists. And scientific statements are also hypothetical. Like, this is what we believe, that 1 and 1 is 2 until the data shows otherwise. It might happen someday, I don't know, but it could happen, right? But for now, as far as we can tell, 1 and 1 is 2. And the church creates its teachings, its language, based on lived human experience and so on. What's it going to look like if it changes? Was that your question? Yes. Yeah. I think that the language is going to reflect the actual lived experience as we go along. So I can't, at this standing right here, because this experience hasn't been lived and it also hasn't been shared. Let me give another example here that might make this even clearer. 2 examples. One is one group of people that we have not really heard from in the church anywhere close to the degree that we need to would be heterosexually married people. We have heard very little about what their sexual intimacy is like spiritually. Do they experience God in their sexual relationship? Most of them would probably say yes, right? But have people spoken, have they written, have they talked about this and shared it with the wider church? No. I mean, sex in general has sort of been taboo, right, for a long time. Another example would be one of the things that comes after, post-Darwin is something called process theology. I was mentioning how now we understand that everything is in motion, including this chair, okay? It's all vibrating, everything is changing, nothing is remaining the same. Well, of course, one of the things that we might think about in that perspective is God himself, herself, right? God in process of evolving, maybe even growing in love. Well, how is this possible? I don't know. That's the ultimate destabilization, right? When you say even God is not finished. Okay, everything is in process, is a work in process. And this is an exciting idea because it means that things are open-ended, but as I said before, it's also threatening because it means, ooh, what ground am I standing on here, right? So I don't know, but I think that this is one of the reasons why theology is exciting, because we're not only invited to, but we have to rethink and rework our language. We can never capture anything really important in human language, perfectly in human language. If I try to write, the perfect poem to express my love for Robert, let's say, or paint a picture or compose a piece of music or something, it's never, ever going to be able to capture who he is completely. I can't capture myself. I certainly can't capture God in language, right? But language is the only way, or at least the best way we have of sharing our experience with each other, about ourselves, about each other, and about God. So we're stuck with this limited but beautiful gift of human language. And I'd say we're quite a ways away yet from that point you're talking about. I would also say it would be a mistake to change Catholic teaching, change the language before we really hear all of these stories, because then we'll end up with something else which is inadequate. All right? We don't want to do it too fast. We need to hear, we need to listen, and then maybe gradually change the language. But sometimes the official magisterium of the church, the official teachers of the church, pronounce on something, I think, too soon before they really understand it. the love between God and us is being mediated from God through the sacrament, through the community, through the people, through the whatever, the ritual is real. But, of course, all the sacraments have undergone continuous change through time, and in terms of language and so on, and I expect that will continue. But it's real in that moment, yes. But it's not the perfect formulation or ritual, for all time. We don't know what the universe will be like, what the earth will be like. We don't even know if we'll be here 500 years from now or 10,000 years from now and so on. I think the Catholic tradition is rich in, in art and music and in many embodied things. Catholics are really pretty good about, you mentioned the sacraments. I mean, we're a sacramental people. There's a deep conviction in the Catholic tradition that God speaks in many ways, but one of the clearest ways is through created realities, through nature, through us, through created realities. So, I mean, all you have to do is go to, Rome or St. Peter someplace, and you can see lots of sensuous bodies in the artwork, all right? So it's not as if sexuality is completely absent. I think that we're in the process of, both through lived human experience and science both, are leading us to move beyond the understanding of sexuality that the official teaching has always, or for at least for a long time, has proclaimed. And I'm referring to sort of the male-female binary. In 2004, which is not that long ago, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the highest sort of doctrinal committee within the Vatican, issued a letter called on the collaboration of men and women in the church and the world. And in there you see a brief but fairly important description of male-female and their relationship. And of course, in the mind of the authors of that, and in the official view of the church, there are two kinds of human beings, and only two. There's male ones and female ones. And these not only differ in biologically, body parts, which we can sort of easily see, but also at a deeper level, there is a fundamental and essential, that's the language they use, a fundamental and essential difference psychologically. In other words, the female mind and the male mind are essentially different. Now, that's already quite a step. But it gets even worse. The third level is spiritual. Fundamental and essential difference spiritually between the female human being and the male human being. And to me, that means that not only do men and women's bodies behave differently, but men's minds and women's minds are different, and male and female, relate to God differently. And on top of that, for all time. This is for eternity. In other words, after death and what I hope will be participation in resurrection, I will be a male being somehow for eternity. And they will be female, all right? Now, of course, we all know also that in history, here on earth, my completion as a human being depends on my entering into a deep relationship with that which is other. And of course, in this male-female binary, what the only possible other is the female other, and vice versa for women. Now, the problem is, of course, that my own life experience tells me that, first of all, not all men are really that much like me. Some are, but many are not. And some women are more like me than some men in very important ways. And the opposite is true too. Not all women are alike, not all men are alike. On top of that, my life experience also tells me, and also my Christian faith, as a matter of fact, tells me that this process of 3 billion years of of evolution, which has led to us, has actually produced, at this point in time, in 2019, every single person in this room is completely different from me. Every one of you is an other. There is no one like me, including my partner Robert, far from it. So that when I enter into a profound relationship, love, permanent commitment, sexual, etc., with another person, in this case with Robert, to me that can't help but be a relationship with a small o, which is what mediates my relationship with the other, capital O, God. So I think that's where this is where both science and lived experience are beginning to teach us more about the complexity of the human being. We are incredibly complex beings, mysteries. And unfortunately, I think the church's official language, the language of mystery is used for God fairly easily, but not sufficiently for us. Because we are tremendous mysteries also, and we're mysteries to ourselves. And by the end of my life, we and I won't have any total understanding of the mystery that we are, but I think there's value in opening ourselves to the discoveries that are there. So yes, we're at the beginning, I think, of unpacking this. Hasn't been totally absent, but I am in complete agreement with the basic Catholic view that access to God is indirect. It's mediated. It's mediated through others, small o. I always tell students when they come to me and they say, well, how can I really know what is my relationship with God? What's the state of my relationship with God? It's one of these questions, And I say, well, if you want to know what your relationship with God is, look at your relationship with other people. How is it that what is the state of your relationship with other people? And that will tell you, or at least go a long way toward telling you, what your relationship with God is really like. That's what it is. Those two, they're not identical, they're not the same thing, but they are also inseparable. They can't really be pulled apart. So the problem with this naming thing, with the language, with the theology, with theological language, you're right, is that it's been formulated, it's been worked out by people who represent, one group within the church, male, celibate, but we haven't heard enough from all the others. And I think that's, the way forward. Now, it's unfortunately the bishops, who are the official teachers in the Catholic Church, live in their way of life for the most part. The people that they hear from, the people that they interact with socially, I'm talking about having dinner with and so on, tend to be their fellows and their families, not ordinary people like us. That's why Robert and I invited the people from our parish to have dinner with us. We need to find a way to break down that wall that surrounds the bishops and allow them to hear the huge human experience that is out there in the church and in the world. So I don't know exactly how we're going to do that, but I think that's what we need to aim for. If you think about the word deposit of faith, and if you think about words like passed down, all of that is being passed through human hands and through human minds, which means human experience. The revelation, the divine revelation, which comes to us in Scripture and which comes to us in tradition, is the result of people reflecting on their own lived experience. That's what the Hebrew Bible is. That's what the Hebrew story is. It's like reflecting on what happened, what we believe happened to us, and then writing it down at some point. And the same thing is true of the New Testament and all the letters of Paul and the rest. There's no way of separating. There's not something like deposit of faith, which is up in the sky and drops out of and is untouched by the world that God has created. It's the breath of God. I mean, even the language that we use is sort of amorphous. We talk about the spirit, the spirit, like breath. It's something, it comes from within, and it speaks through creation. Well, what's written on the page doesn't change, but we say that the New Testament, the gospel, is living. Okay, it's a living document, which means that the significance, the meaning, the impact, how it speaks to me, how God speaks through it to me now, not only depends on the words that are on the written page, but also on who I am that's receiving it. Thank you very much. All the best.